On this week's Bet the Process podcast, we have Noah Sternig from Kalshi to talk a little bit about what they are, and then spoiler alert, their prediction market. And then Rufus and I talk a little bit about the PGA Championship, our Calcutta results, and then a reflection on what role prediction markets might play in evolving the world of sports speculation. So with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of the Bet the Process podcast, where we are post PGA Championship, and we had a Calcutta where I actually won and Rufus actually lost, which was rare these days. You've been on a Calcutta heater, so it was, I was actually surprised because I thought when I was talking to you afterwards, I thought you had done well, but I didn't realize you had done
On the
not well.
Calcutta?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of field guys that kind of collapsed. Well, I don't want to say collapse. We had a few guys collapse down the stretch that hurt us. Although, I mean, you had John Rahm, right? Who his
His collapse was
it just sucked. It was
very costly. What's that?
yeah, it was a fun, except for the fact that Scheffler kind of ran away with it at the end. But there were so many guys up there, and it was crazy how big the swings were between like two strokes.
Well, I mean,
Of
you were just like sitting there
Calcutta.
being like, I just need to get one of my guys to 5 under, and that's going to have a huge impact. Or if this guy, like, even just on that last, I was like texting with one of my buddies, and I was like, if Alex, we could really use an Alex Norm, bogey on 18 because he'll fall out of the 4 under. And then, did you have Alex Noren? Oh, you did have Alex Noren, didn't you?
I actually was happy that he
He's Team
bogeyed
Troon,
it.
by the way, so I shouldn't root against
I'll
Alex
tell you,
Noren.
despite the fact that I had the Calcutta position there, I was kind of happy he bogeyed because it made our top tens split among that we had. We had, for example, top 10 bets on, actually, we had some bad ones against, like, we had Adam Scott with his double bogey on 18 really kind of hurt us there for top five, top 10. But we had some guys that still had share of top five, top tens. And it made it split among, I think, 9 people instead of 10. It was like three spots. I mean, because yeah, tied for eighth it was then like tied for 18th after that, right? So like I was rooting against my Calcutta guy, sadly.
So we had Joseph on Lamagna on last week, and we talked a little bit about how this course was going to play. And then, obviously the guy that I do the Calcuttas with, Will, left me like a voice message basically saying that, they had a very counter take to to how this course was going to play, meaning like they did not think the Bombers were going to be the value. They thought the market was overvaluing the Bombers and that it was more like the accurate drivers that could stay in the fairway. And he said, like, if you see Bombers hitting and then not being penalized, or if you see them hacking out of the rough and being penalized, that's how you're going to know this thesis was true. How do you think it ended up playing? Do you think that, Will's assessment was correct, or do you think it was how do you reflect on how that course played?
That's a great question, Jeff. And I think it played less of a bomber's course than it has in the past. And Data Golf has this kind of cool thing where they have course insights during a round, and so you can actually see in a particular round how much driving distance versus how much it favored driving distance versus driving accuracy in terms of not actually missing fairways or hitting it long, but
And what does that
player's
say? What
skill.
did it say?
It's like the bombometer. In the first two rounds, it had it favoring more accurate players.
Yeah,
And then it became more longer hitters. I mean, but that's one of those things where there is going to be a ton of volatility.
noise. Yeah.
Yeah, a ton of noise. And there's a ton of noise like even in a full tournament. And so it is hard to say. I mean, we were very pro Bryson, as you know, and Bryson ended up playing quite well by, because of his length off the tee and being able to hit it straight off the tee for someone
Yeah, but
that long.
I was gonna say that's the thing about Bryson though. He is just good off the tee, period, right? Like it's not just that he's a bomber, he's good off the tee, period, and he's a good putter. He just can't like figure out distances at all with his wedges.
I think the big thing was we really liked guys who were good off the tee in general,
Right.
like which is a combination of distance and accuracy, but we thought that was important. And I think that thesis was pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean these
I don't
holes
know. I
played
haven't done a
these holes
bogey
played
deep like
easy
that.
if you were in the middle of the fairway. They played incredibly hard if you weren't. That was basically what a lot of these holes played out. Like if you were in the rough, people were just because they were these
Depends.
holes. I mean, generally, like, well, it's an obvious thing to say you'd rather be in the fairway than the rough, right? It's a pretty,
I think in a lot of cases you'd rather be in a fairway bunker than the rough too.
yeah. I mean, not on the par fives, but on most other stuff. Because
Yeah,
all the par fives were somewhat reachable. So if you were in a fairway bunker, it was much harder to reach, and then you put yourself at a disadvantage. Although I do think some of the fairway bunker situations where people were like forced to lay up actually made them in better situations because they were able to hit it to like 100 yards and then like kind of like really play the hole conservatively, but also be able to still make birdie.
I think one thing is the 14th hole, the fact that it was drivable for everybody really did it made it so distance wasn't that important. And actually, I think it hurt a guy like Bryson because Bryson was like in between clubs there most of the time, and his strength isn't his long iron play, and for him, it's like, oh, this is in certain rounds it was a long iron,
I
and
love
so
that you love the Calcutta though, even though you lost, which makes me really respect you more. Which I don't
well,
respect you
it
that much,
was
so but
well, Jeff, it's I feel like I've been treading water for most of this golf season, and it's which has motivated me to work a lot harder actually on the modeling side, and we did have by far our best week of the year and best tournament ever where we didn't hit an outright. And it might be close, like it was just like matchups ran unreal good. So I'm definitely happy to give some money back in the Calcutta because
I appreciate
and
that because you basically gave it to me.
I mean it's
Um,
one of those things, but you know how it works. Like if you think back to our like college basketball season, it felt like I think something like 70% of our profit happened in a certain like a 3 or 4 week period, right? And so it last year was one of those years for golf where it just was a nice steady rise all year. And this year it's felt like it's just been like holding steady the whole time without, or we just haven't been able to get any momentum going. And it was nice to just have one of those weeks where everything seemed to go and fall into place.
all right, let's
And if
welcome in our guest from Kalshi, and then we can talk to you guys all again on the other side.
Bet, bet, bet the
We
process.
now welcome in Noah Sternig to the Bet the Process podcast. Noah, you work for Kalshi. Tell us what Kalshi is. We have 7 listeners, so hopefully you can maybe win over half of them and you'd have 3.5 new users.
Incredible. Yeah, Kalshi is an exchange, federally regulated by the CFTC. We offer peer-to-peer trading on all sorts of events. We initially started with climate, culture, politics. We've now kind of grown into the sports space. So, on Kalshi, you can trade on who will be the next president and foreign elections and domestic elections. You can trade on the Eastern Conference Championship in the Professional Basketball League. You can trade on what egg prices will be by the end of the month. So we allow people to trade on many different things. The focus of Kalshi is to allow a regulated environment in which people can trade on any event they choose.
I
This is
learned today that there's a 41% chance that Bitcoin goes above 150,000 this year. I was like, damn.
Yeah, the financial markets we have are really interesting. I think an interesting product we have are those future markets on cryptocurrency and different indices. So pretty bullish ride right now for Bitcoin. Kind of excited to see where that heads.
Well, and it kind of allows people to hedge that way too.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Kalshi like a primary purpose of Kalshi is to allow people to hedge. Sometimes the stock market moves in directions that are maybe unpredictable, even if you predicted what would happen. So on Kalshi, if you think inflation will go up, instead of going short on the stock market, you can just take a position on inflation being hot. And that's a much more, that provides you much more direct exposure to what you're actually predicting rather than predicting how an asset will react to an event.
And if you're regulated by the CFTC, there is a certain not only like there's like a requirement, right, that there would be some hedging need for some of these things. That's sort of the point of this, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think everything on our platform has some sort of economic purpose. whether it's an actual economic event or not. Things on Kalshi are in general, hedgeable events, things that have actual real world implications.
So does the legalization of sports betting make the need for Kalshi legitimate? Meaning, like, if you have like sports betting, I mean, what is the hedgeable event for sports, I guess is the question.
Unless
Sure.
the bets are smack.
What's
Yeah, I think
that?
there's a lot of different, examples of where sports outcomes matter for different things, right? So, your team making it to the NFC Championship in football will certainly increase the GDP of a city for that given week, right? So people will come flocking, hotels will fill up, jersey sales will go up. There's lots of different economies that specifically rely on their sport teams. I personally grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The entire city and the entire economy of Green Bay is reliant on the Green Bay Packers. So without, the Green Bay Packers being a successful franchise, the city of Green Bay would not look like it looks today. Now, the impacts of professional sports teams are very different on different city scales. I'm sure New York City would be great, regardless of if the Knicks, were playing in the conference finals right now. But regardless, there's still at least some economic impact of teams playing in certain situations and winning or losing certain games.
Last night, alcohol sales were probably pretty high in New York after that game was over, I imagine.
Sure, yeah, I would not doubt it.
So
Okay, no, so someone taking a position, I'll say taking a price on Kalshi, a price that's already up there. Um, how likely is that to be against another user who's making that versus against an automated market maker? I mean, I don't, I'm sure you don't have the data right in front of you, and if you did, you wouldn't want to tell me exactly. But I'm curious how you balance that in terms of the need for liquidity for market makers, but at the same time, um, making it accessible for I guess regular users to make markets.
That's a great question. I think like first and foremost, we definitely prioritize the democratization of trading on Kalshi. And what I mean by that is if you're a regular person, you're not an institution, you don't work for a quantitative firm, you don't work for a books maker, an odds maker, you have the same access as anyone would on Kalshi. So, the majority of the liquidity on Kalshi's books is actually provided by real people, small little prop shops that regular people have set up because on Kalshi, when you become a member, you instantly gain access to our API. So anyone that's on Kalshi with some sort of computer science or development experience, or who maybe knows someone with computer science or development experience, can create automated orders, automated order flow, and market make on Kalshi. So, we obviously have market makers that have obligations to market make on Kalshi. This is to provide a healthy environment, stable pricing, good walls so that people don't experience heavy amounts of slippage. But for the most part, the orders that are on the top of the book are going to be orders from real people. And those are because real people are competing against each other to get the absolute best price they can. So you'll never, if you're trading on Kalshi and you're a taker, if you're a regular person who just wants to place a trade on a game, you're not like Kalshi isn't deciding who your counterparty is. The order book is deciding who your counterparty is. And if the person on the top of the order book is an institution, that'll be your counterparty. The person on the top of the book is a person, that will be your counterparty. There's no bias, there's no discretion there.
is there a process by which a consumer can list a market themselves, or do you guys create all the markets?
So we create all of the markets, and that's just a regulatory thing. But we do have a feature on Kalshi called Market Builder, where someone can build a theoretical market, and that gets sent to our markets team, in which we decide a few things like, is this a good market? Like, does this actually have a place on Kalshi? Is this ethical? Is this legal? Is there reasonable interest here? Do we already have a contract that we have with the CFTC that allows us to list this market? If not, do we feel comfortable filing a contract to list this market? So people can't spin up markets completely on their own, But the majority of our markets actually come from user suggestions, right? Users know exactly what they want. Users know our product best. And because people inside of Kalshi can't trade on Kalshi markets, we think that users are the best way to source Kalshi markets. So when someone suggests a market, we can easily list this. We go ahead and we do list it.
So sports are a little bit different than a lot of the other markets you have, I guess, in that aside from Poly Market, nobody else is really offering um, markets on elections, on, what the interest rate's going to be after the next Fed meeting. Whereas in sports, you're up against DraftKings, FanDuel, and personally, I don't really see it as competitors exactly, but it's a whole different thing. But you are, in some ways, you are a competitor, right? I mean, and who is your, I guess, target customer for sports betting, and do you see the traditional sports books as competitors?
Sure. I think this is a very distinct product. It's very different than a traditional sports book, right? The purpose of Kalshi is to allow people to trade against each other. And the purpose of a sports book is to allow someone to trade against the house. And there are clear and distinct benefits for both structures, right? I think the common benefit for like a sports book, for example, is like the line will almost always be up. The line exists. There are better promotions. Maybe the outcomes are more predictable. Um, there are lots of different benefits for sports books. And then the same front. And also like sports books have these fun player props. Sports books have parlays. Sports book have spreads, over unders, lots of different things you can trade and bet on. But on Kalshi, it's much more simple. And the sole purpose is just allow people to trade on outcomes that they care about. And it doesn't really matter if this is a sports event or a political event. To us, as long as that event has some sort of real world implication and significance, it's something that someone should be able to trade on. And you know, I don't necessarily see like the FanDuels and DraftKings of the world as being competitors. I think they're just another player in this space. And I think that these two different products that are very distinct should coexist and will coexist.
So I do think, I mean, you say they are different products, and they certainly are, but I do think one thing they do have in common is that if the market maker, if the market makers aren't making money, you don't have liquidity, right? And for sports books, the market makers are the books themselves. On Kalshi and on other exchanges, you have a lot of contracted market makers that, they, and without making, if they don't make money, they're not going to be in the business of doing it. So I mean, so I think it's kind of a tough line to balance. And I think we saw this with a few weeks ago, maybe last month, orders being canceled, I think on profit because of a mistake by a market maker. Something was supposed to be a series price, or it was supposed to be a game price, but instead was listed as a series price. How do you sort of balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the first thing is, Kalshi doesn't, we don't like cancel or void trades. We're not in the business of assessing if a trade is bad or good, if the odds are correct or not correct. In that way, like it's not necessary that like Kalshi is the Wild West, but it's more so that like Kalshi is hands off. Like we are not responsible for setting odds. We are not responsible for setting probabilities and likelihoods, and we're not in the business of assessing if fills are bad or good. Um, with your question about like market makers and the fact that, market makers only choose to participate if they are profitable, I think that's a fair point. But I also think like the exchange model has proven to be successful without needing market makers or people that actually have obligations to provide liquidity. Right now on Kalshi, there are zero obligations to provide liquidity on NBA games while they are occurring. So there's not a single market maker required to do this. But during NBA games, if you watch them and you look at the order book on Kalshi, the spreads are super tight, the uptime is super high, and the depth of the order book is huge. And that's just because there are plenty of people who want, one-sided positions on different markets. And instead of doing a quick order and having, the downsides of a quick order being like I could slip. I pay more fees for quick orders. Those different factors are the reason why people decide to put up limit orders. And, we're often, considered a maker-friendly exchange. We want to promote people to put limit orders on the book, in order to, have more tight, more liquid, a better user experience, for live sports trading.
So
Can you go ahead, Rufus?
I'm kind of interested in who your typical customer is on the sports side because like for example when most recreational sports bettors are very familiar with the American odds system, um, and so for example when Sport Trade launched they displayed things in terms of probabilities, like you guys do. I know you have now an option to see it in American odds, but I think a lot of it is uh, people are used to speaking a certain language, and if this is a different language, a foreign language to them, they're going to be less likely to use it. Whereas the language sort of that like traders are using, like makes more sense, I guess, in sort of the exchanges. So are you pushing, I guess, to at some point make it look more like sports betting to try to get that sort of retail flow of people that would be betting at DraftKings or FanDuel?
I think we've thought about this. You mentioned we have a setting, we have a toggle that allows you to see American odds. Just because a lot of people talk in American odds, it can sometimes be more intuitive. To me, it's not as intuitive, but that's just because, I work for Kalshi and I've worked in finance. So these American odds, I understand how they work, but they don't necessarily make too much sense to
They
me.
don't make they don't make they don't make sense from any real perspective in terms of like it's not a case of the best odds system winning, but
No, I completely agree. And I think that's like one of the like that's kind of the reason why I think like we have chosen to have the default be percent odds and price and cents. Like people are, maybe the average sports bettor who uses FanDuel and DraftKings sees, 60 cents and doesn't recognize that's like minus 130 or whatever it would be.
150.
150. Yeah, see, I don't even bother trying to do this mental math. Um, but if someone, if I think if, if like Kalshi's like sole mission is like we provide these really great forecasts. And I think it's much more useful to see a forecast in terms of percent odds. Like, what are the odds a team's going to win? It makes much more sense for me to say 80% rather than minus whatever. Or 20% rather than plus whatever. These just make more sense. They're more intuitive. And the way that our markets are structured in the same way is, you buy you buy on a contract basis. So you're buying, contracts. You can't buy partial contracts on Kalshi. And because of that, like this this notion of like put this much to get $100 or put, you know, $100 to get this much is not actually how the math ends up working out on Kalshi. So American odds are just not the best system for this necessarily.
Although, but like if I see that FanDuel's offering minus 130 and you have it at 60%, like the user then has to say, okay, which one's the best price and how do I factor in the commission? Is there a way to, I mean, I personally, I've traded on Kalshi and I still don't necessarily understand how the commission structure works. If you're taking a price, I know that making a price is much more beneficial, but uh, how does that work? And is there a plan to sort of display to a user what that price would be, effective price is after commission, just to allow easier comparison so they know I mean, because if you're Kalshi is going to be offering better prices on a lot of things than FanDuel or DraftKings because it's going to be tighter spreads. So I think you almost want to highlight that, right?
Yeah, we definitely do. So the American odds that we list right now factor in fees. Uh, and they assume a $100 order. So like we can't necessarily, that number has to account for the order book. But we assume a $100 trade, which I think is a pretty median trade. It's not deceptively low or deceptively high. Uh, and the way that the commission or the fee works is it's just, like again, Kalshi has, we have zero incentive for either team to win the game. We have no skin in the game. We're agnostic to what happens our fan affiliations, which is kind of a really cool place to be in. Um, but the way that our fees work, it's just, we have an equation. It's very simple. It's like round up, 7% of contracts times price times one minus price. And what this does is it makes, the price of taking at 99 cents a lot cheaper and the price of taking at 50 cents a lot more expensive. And it's just a way to ensure that, taking at 99 cents is actually feasible. Because if like the fee for 99 cents was 1 cent, there would be no action on 99 cents. And if the fee for taking at 1 cent was 1 cent, it'd be, an effective 100% fee. So it's a logarithmic way to charge fees. It's non-variable per market. Um, and it's proven to be successful for the majority of our markets. I think again, we show that fee, we bake it into the American odds because we understand that when people are on sports books, the fee already exists in the odds. So that's why we choose to do it. But in the way that we present our prices in percentages or our prices in cents, the fee isn't included until you're on the order confirmation page where we disclose how much you're total paying and how much you'll be paid out.
Well, you said it's for I forget, $100 order, or maybe it was 100 contract. Does the fee change as a function of the size of, or how many contracts?
There are nuances, but effectively no. The only reason it would change is because the math is to round up. So, if you bought more, your effective rate could technically be like centi cents or deci cents lower. But that would only be a result of rounding. So there's no discount for taking really large positions. There's no penalty for taking small positions.
What percentage, a couple questions. What percentage of your business is sports? Is it like roughly speaking?
I mean, like recently, I think we've seen a lot of success with sports, and some of it comes with the fact that some of our sports are listed on brokers like Robinhood, and there's a lot of, retail flow coming from them as well. I think, the last time I looked, there's something like over half of our volume came from sports last month. Um, but it's also very dependent on, the
Right.
season.
When the election's happening, I'm sure that's a very different thing. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. When the election happens, there'll be lots of election volume. When the Oscars happen, there'll be lots of culture volume.
What
Uh,
what is a market in sports that either exists now or you think should exist or will exist eventually on Kalshi that could never exist in sports betting?
that's a great question. I think like one that we had that I think was really interesting was if the tush push would be banned. Um, and as far as I know, like the sports books don't have this. They might. I haven't necessarily looked. But I think this is a really cool, sports adjacent market because it's something that lots of football fans are passionate about. They either love it or hate it. Not a lot of people think, it's no big deal. Um, and it also will influence the way that the game is played. So I think that was a really cool market to see people forecasting, hearing rumors, placing trades, getting the news. It falls down to zero. Um, but I think that was a really interesting market. I think one that sportsbooks technically could offer, but maybe don't exactly offer yet, or wouldn't be able to offer on as efficient basis, or something like the exact amount of wins a team will have in the regular season. I think this is a really interesting market. We have different controls that make this really capital efficient. Because the market is mutually exclusive, we can give collateral returns to people who buy no positions, which is a way that people can like essentially establish a position in which they could never lose. It's like they could have a position of negative risk. I think that these mutually exclusive markets on Kalshi are very interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting about Kalshi is, sports books will always let you purchase yes. You can always buy yes from a sports book, and in many cases, you can buy no as a proxy of buying yes for something else. But I think there's lots of instances on Kalshi, at least, every single market you can buy no for. And because you can buy no, you can kind of take that lens of the book. I feel like when you're the no buyer, that's how the book is trading. The book is always taking no. So on Kalshi, like you can take no as often as you can take yes. It's very interesting to be like, instead of going long three teams to win the finals because I think the fourth team will lose, I can just go long the fourth team losing.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I
Rufus,
mean,
you
I
got any
think
other
that's
questions?
no, it's great. I mean, think about like a golf market where a traditional sports book is going to have like a 40% theoretical hold on the market overall. And let's say Tiger was playing, right? Even though Tiger hasn't played and, he may or may not have functioning legs or back, a book would still probably list him at like 80 to 1, maybe 100 to 1. And obviously during peak, when Tiger was actually capable physically of playing, you would see Tiger when he truly had odds of like 800 to 1 listed at like, 40 to 1, just because there's demand. You could never, and you can't bet the other side. And so I think having the two-way market really enables tighter pricing for the market as a whole. And so you get, I mean, that's how you
Does
get
is
less
has Rufus, has
bid.
Kalshi, and I don't know if you know this, but has Kalshi's existence created more efficiency in the general sports betting market? Has there
I
been
don't
any
know. So,
impact
so
yet?
my experience with Kalshi in sports was, unfortunately laying Florida to not make the Final Four, not make the championship game, and not win the NCAA tournament before the tournament began. So that wasn't that didn't turn out super well for me. And then that and golf. I will say this, I think it's really good in golf between rounds, when there is a
So
golfer that
I'm not asking like the
no,
product itself. What I'm asking is, I mean, if you again, like, markets tend towards efficiency. If there's multiple markets and there is one out there that offers this no opportunity. So all of this, like, I think our most of our listeners are going to really understand and gravitate towards and like understand like the efficiency piece of it. I mean, this is like a great commercial for, I think you guys may get more than 3 new users from this. But the what I'm asking is, have you seen, or Noah, have you noticed any ways that sports books have started to have to be more efficient because of the existence of Kalshi?
well, I will say I think it depends on the market. I think with futures markets, one issue is the tick size being so large. The fact that it's integer percents means that only a few golfers are really tradable. So during the PGA Championship, I remember seeing volume on both sides of a particular golfer at either, I think it was 3% and 2%, or 2% and 1%, where you could get hundreds of thousands on either side. But that's literally, you're either, that's 99, that's a minus 9,900
Yep.
plus 4,900 market. It's a really, really wide market. And so I think that with golf, you're not
I mean,
really
that's a
efficient, right? Because
question
of
for
that.
Noah, which is
Yeah.
essentially, are you guys going to, obviously integer size lends itself to much bigger spreads than if you were in like a real market, financial market where, these ticks have gotten pretty close together.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Why don't we let
it's,
him answer? Why
yeah,
don't we let him answer?
I was going to
Sure.
add.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely recognize this as a problem. I think, and it shines, right? It shines in markets like golf and maybe like futures on tennis, different things where there are lots of people in the field and low probabilities for almost anyone in the field besides Scotty Scheffler or whoever. Um, and we actually are working on these, like we're working right now on building the infrastructure to provide ticks at the decicent level, which I think like they instantly make this problem 10 times smaller by, mathematically at least. And
Literally 10 times smaller.
yes, and I think that this will be a huge, a huge value add for Kalshi. Like I think there's there are a lot of like it's a very reasonable problem to bring up. And I think it does make some things like at least for like someone who's very sports sharp or vig or fee intolerant, that like 1 cent golfers don't make sense unless they actually are 1 cent.
Well, you have golfers that have like a 1 in 500 chance of winning, right? And if the max odds is going to be 100 to 1. But how do you balance that? Like, would it be the decibel level overall, or would it be some threshold of if the probability is below this, we go to that? Because at the same time, if you have ticks that are too small, you have potential issues with market makers getting like pennied whereas other, people are going to put up little small offers to just figure, if a market maker is putting this up at 60%, I'll take, I'll take 60.1%, knowing that they're probably making money.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think thresholds sometimes make sense, right? Like I think, we haven't necessarily thought this through too much, and we haven't made any product decisions, but if you were to say like 90 and up, we invoke a decicent, and 10 and below, we invoke a decicent. Seems to make sense. Uh, but also, if decicent applied to the entire market, we're not sure that would be such a bad thing. Penning exists, but um, at the end of the day, like we are an exchange. We sell to the high, like if you're buying, you sell to the highest bidder, and if the highest bidder is 0.1 cents more, then the end user gets a price that's 0.1 better.
That's true.
And I think like if we want to focus on the end user and we want to focus on providing like the best prices and the best user experience, we can't necessarily decide that we are going to do everything, uh, everything in our power to appease market makers or appease liquidity providers. We're not in the business again of choosing sides. We're in the business of engineering a really great, reliable product that gets people the best price for everything they want. And if someone outbids you by 0.1, go ahead and outbid them by 0.1 again. It'll slowly come to a place in which like the market is truly as tight as it possibly could be. And I see no problem with that.
Awesome. Well, Noah, thank you for joining us. Really cool stuff that you guys are doing. I'm probably going to sign it. Can I do it in California?
Yeah, all 50 states. We're federally regulated, so you can trade in all 50 states.
Awesome. Well, I will maybe we'll get a promo code or something from you guys so we can help promote this for you. But
Yeah, I'd love to. We can
process.
totally get that set up.
okay, thank you.
Bet, bet, bet the process.
So that was our interview with Noah Sternig from the Kalshi, not the Kalshi.
The
The
Kalshi.
Facebook,
Like
from
the
the
Facebook.
Facebook. Yeah.
Me to it.
I was kind of listening to you nerd out with them and felt like it was very self-serving because you're basically just asking all these questions you want to answer. But
What?
what
Wait, okay, appealing to rec bettors. I think that's like a.
well, what I
I think that's
would, but
self-serving at
I
all.
think again, like the broader question to me is, and especially like when you think about a partnership with like a Robinhood, is this opening like a whole like the whole so what they're doing is literally this idea that I had I don't know 15 years ago, 20 years ago when we started Pro Trade. It was the whole idea was, we started Pro Trade as a way to trade athletes like they were stocks. And it was like a pretend market. And we were kind of like leveraging fantasy sports as our legal way, but we never got into like real regulated markets. And I remember reading an article about futures and the CFTC and kind of going into the regulatory, world where if 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 you can create these financial contracts and have them be regulated by the CFTC as long as there is a legitimate hedging risk. Every market needs hedgers and speculators. And the reason that sports is so interesting is that you naturally have speculators. So all you need to do is have like legitimate hedging needs. So, what I think is interesting about this is not necessarily the direct comparison to FanDuel or DraftKings, in my mind at least. It's does this open a whole new way for us to speculate on sports that isn't the fucking terrible sports betting world that we live in, which is, like I've been probably pretty vocal on thinking that this is like a race to the bottom in this industry. And so like when I look at this, I go, wow, this is fascinating because ultimately, again, like this idea that, in the world, if you, there's like I thought his tush push thing was really an interesting analogy for this. And so like when I look at this and think about this, what my interest lies more in like, is this opening a new market or opportunity and less of the how as a rec better do I use Kalshi kind of thing.
Well, I think I mean, to succeed, I think they need retail flow, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I
so,
find
but
it interesting
I
to
think that
see.
I think
I think
again,
both
like,
things are interesting. I agree with what you
well,
said.
but
I
I
think what
think,
you said is interesting, Jeff, very interesting. And it makes me think like you could have a market on like a player's earnings or something. And I think the other thing that Kalshi does, I don't know if you know this, Jeff, but you were earning money on your positions, like you're earning interest on your positions that are tied up, and your cash there at a 3.75% annual yield. So
wow,
it makes long-term futures much more viable.
got it. It's cool. Anything else on that interview?
No, I mean, I want you, I thought you were going to tell me more about how my questions
No,
were.
no, I'm not. There's not a lot like more necessarily. There's just like what again, like what I find, they're early in their journey, and I guess to when I think about where they could go in the innovation, right? Like I get excited about anything I see that's innovative in this space, and I think more than sports betting exchanges again that are largely geared towards sports bettors and regulated in a sports betting way. I find what they're doing to be much more interesting because exactly as you're saying, like they can come up with contracts and ideas that are far different than what we're seeing in sports betting. And so I find that aspect of things much more interesting. And what more so like I want to see it evolve, right? And maybe the reason that like your questions to me were like frustrating, not really frustrating, but it was more like I don't want these guys, and they won't because they're obviously visionaries, but I don't want them pigeonholed into the idea of how do we make a better DraftKings or FanDuel. I want to see them thinking about like how do we create a better way for people to speculate and have an investment in a sporting event in a way that is non-predatory, in a way that is efficient, in a way that is, like just like anything else. Like it's like stocks generally go up. Owning stocks is generally a good thing, although there's people that day trade and probably lose their shirt. But, is there a way to do that in sports betting at some level? I don't know. Probably not because there's not like
You can
financial. What's
make it so
that?
everybody goes up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean,
The zero sum game. That's the
again,
problem.
like it's like I just don't want people losing their shirts over time or something like that. I don't know. Anyways,
I 100% agree with that. And I think I love that direction of your line of thought there. And I wish you had said more.
well, you were asking him questions, and I think it was interesting to listen to, and I don't know if he's ultimately maybe we can get the CEO on or something. Like, it'd be great to talk like the real vision of this, and I think his answer would be like we don't know, which I think is probably the right answer. But even just that question of like how important is sports betting, and I think it was interesting because again, like when you build a business, right? You have this natural early adopters or this natural like and they're creating a new market or a new segment. So leveraging an existing segment, which is sports betting, is a natural way. But hopefully, it evolves. And again, like if you go back to this idea of like using Robinhood, because I work with one of the guys that works on my team was an early Robinhood engineer, and he said, "Well, we've talked about doing this," and then they actually partnered during the NCAA tournament to create these, have these contracts be and getting that distribution through Robinhood is pretty awesome. Do you have a Robinhood account, Rufus?
I do not know.
You should get a Robinhood account. It's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. It's like the best. Like you can put cash in there right now, transferred in there, and it earns like 5%. And it's like the best save, and it's like a savings account. So we should get Robinhood to sponsor. Maybe I'll try to see if we can get Robinhood to sponsor a podcast because I think they're pretty good product. So, anyways, all right. Well, you're in Paris. Enjoy Paris. Enjoy the wedding.
Will
I know
do.
you're gonna go and eat lots of croissants and escargot and
All the carbs, man.
drink
Good. It's
some
so freaking good.
Burgundy and all that kind of stuff. I'll be in Vegas this weekend for any people that want to hear about 50-year-olds going to Wet Republic, which I hear people don't want to hear about. But if you're happy to be in Vegas for Memorial Day weekend, hit me up. I'll be around. And we'll talk to you guys all. Rufus won't
And
be here next week, I don't think, because he's going to be. So
I'm going to be at
maybe
the Esalen. I'll be at the
how
Esalen
about this?
in Big
People that
Sur.
listen to this, DM me or tweet at me who you want to be my co-host next week, because I'll
Oh, I
record
love
something
this
next week.
idea. I love this idea.
Bet the process.
All right, talk to you guys all again next week.
Bet bet the process.